To the choirmaster, according to Jeduthun, a psalm of David. For God alone my soul waits in silence. From him comes my salvation. He alone is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. I shall not be greatly shaken. How long will all of you attack a man to batter him like a leaning wall, a tottering fence? They only plan to thrust him down from his high position. They take pleasure in falsehood. They bless with their mouths, but inwardly they curse. Selah. For God alone, O my soul, wait in silence, for my hope is from him. He only is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. I shall not be shaken. On God rests my salvation and my glory. My mighty rock, my refuge, is God. Trust in him at all times, O people. Pour out your heart before him. God is a refuge for us. Selah. Those of low estate are but a breath. Those of high estate are a delusion. In the balances they go up. They are together lighter than a breath. Put no trust in extortion. Set no vain hopes on robbery. If riches increase, set not your heart on them. Once God has spoken, twice have I heard this, that power belongs to God, and that to you, O Lord, belongs steadfast love. For you will render to a man according to his work. A psalm of David when he was in the wilderness of Judah. O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. So I have looked upon you in the sanctuary, beholding your power and glory. Because your steadfast love is better than life, my lips will praise you. So I will bless you as long as I live. In your name I will lift up my hands. My soul will be satisfied as with fat and rich food, and my mouth will praise you with joyful lips when I remember you upon my bed and meditate on you in the watches of the night. For you have been my help, and in the shadow of your wings I will sing for joy. My soul clings to you, your right hand upholds me. But those who seek to destroy my life shall go down into the depths of the earth. They shall be given over to the power of the sword. They shall be a portion for jackals. But the king shall rejoice in God. All who swear by him shall exult, for the mouths of liars will be stopped. To the Jethro, the priest of Midian, saying, Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel his people, how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Now Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, had taken Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her home, along with her 2 sons. The name of the one was Gershom, for he said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land. And the name of the other, Eliezer, for he said, The God of my father was my help, and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness where he was encamped at the mountain of God. And when he sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons with her. Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and bowed down and kissed him. And they asked each other of their welfare and went into the tent. Then Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had come upon them in the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. And Jethro rejoiced for all the good that the Lord had done to Israel, in that he had delivered them out of the hand of the Egyptians. Jethro said, Blessed be the Lord who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, because in this affair they dealt arrogantly with the people. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. The next day Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood around Moses from morning till evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, What is this that you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone, and all the people stand around you from morning till evening? And Moses said to his father-in-law, Because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide between one person and another, and I make them know the statutes of God and his laws. Moses' father-in-law said to him, What you are doing is not good. You and the people with you will certainly wear yourselves out, for the thing is too heavy for you. You are not able to do it alone. Now obey my voice. I will give you advice, and God be with you. You shall represent the people before God and bring their cases to God, and you shall warn them about the statutes and the laws, and make them know the way in which they must walk and what they must do. Moreover, look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy and hate a bribe, and place such men over the people as chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of 50s, and of 10s. And let them judge the people at all times. Every great matter they shall bring to you, but any small matter they shall decide themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this, God will direct you, you will be able to endure, and all this people also will go to their place in peace. So Moses listened to the voice of his father-in-law, and did all that he had said. Moses chose able men out of all Israel, and made them heads over the people, chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of 50s, and of 10s. And they judged the people at all times. Any hard case they brought to Moses, but any small matter they decided themselves. Then Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went away to his own country. On the 3rd new moon after the people of Israel
1. When Jethro, the priest of Midian. This chapter consists of 2 parts. First of all, the arrival of Jethro in the camp is related, and his congratulation of Moses on account of the prosperity of his enterprise, together with the praise and sacrifice rendered to God. Secondly, his proposed form of government for the people is set forth, in consequence of which judges and rulers were chosen, lest Moses should sink under his heavy task. The greater number of commentators think that Zipporah, having been enraged on account of her son's circumcision, had turned back on their journey and gone to live with her father. But to me, this does not seem probable. For Moses would never have allowed his sons to be deprived of the redemption of which he was the minister, nor would it have been consistent that they should afterwards be appointed priests of whom God was not the Redeemer. Besides, if he had deposited his wife and children in safety and had advanced alone to the contest, he would have been deservedly suspected of deceit or of excessive cowardice. Wherefore I have no doubt but that he underwent, together with his family, that miserable yoke of bondage by which they were long oppressed, and by this proof evidenced his faithfulness, so that greater authority might attend his vocation. The statement then, in the 2nd verse, after he had sent her back, I apply to Moses because he had sent back his wife from the wilderness to visit her father, either having yielded to the desire which was natural to her as a woman, or, induced by his own feelings of piety, he had wished to show respect in this way to an old man nearly connected with him. There is something forced and cold in the words, which some would supply, after he had sent back gifts. The text runs very well. Thus, after Moses had sent back his wife, she was brought again by his father-in-law, thus returning and repaying his kindness. 3. And her 2 sons. It was remarked in its proper place how distinguished a proof not only of faith, but of magnanimity and firmness Moses had manifested in giving these names to his sons. For we cannot doubt but that he brought on himself the ill will of his connections, as if he despised the country of his wife, by calling the one Gershom a strange land. And the name of his son continually cried out, that though he inhabited Midian, yet was he an alien in his heart, and though sojourning for a time would afterwards seek another habitation. Whence also we may conjecture that he took them with him into Egypt, rather than banish from him these 2 pledges of his piety on account of the sudden anger and reproaches of his wife, since by their names he was daily reminded that God's covenant was to be preferred to all earthly advantages. 5. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law. It was not so much love for Moses as the fame of the miracles which drew this old man, 195,195 C. Bonveillard, this good old man, far bowed down with age, from his home into the wilderness, for it will hereafter appear from the context that he was not induced by ambition, because after he had offered sacrifice to God, and, in solemn thanksgiving, had testified that he ascribed all the glory to God alone, he returned home again with the same simplicity in which he had come. Moses, too, at the beginning of the chapter, has stated the cause of his coming. For he does not say that he had heard of the arrival of his son-in-law, but how wonderful had been God's goodness and power in delivering Moses and the people. He desired, therefore, to be in some measure a spectator of the things whereof he had heard, and not to neglect, by remaining at home, such illustrious instances of God's bounty. I have already explained why Mount Horeb is distinguished by the name of the Mount of God. The vision, indeed, which had been already vouchsafed to Moses there, rendered it worthy of this honorable title, but here, as before, there is reference made rather to the promulgation of the law, whereby God consecrated the mountain to himself. 7. And Moses went out. In the foregoing verse he had related what happened last viz. That Jethro said, I am come, and have brought to thee thy wife and children, but this transposition is common in Hebrew. Now then, he adds, that Moses went to meet him, and to pay him honor, and that they met each other with mutual kindness, and respectively performed the duties of affection. To ask each other of their peace, 196,196 so in margin of E, is tantamount to inquiring whether things were well and prospering. But the main point is that Moses told him how gracious God had been to his people, for this was the drift of the whole of his address, that when he had left his father-in-law, he had not yielded to the impulse of lightness, but had obeyed the call of God, as had afterwards been proved by his extraordinary aids and by heavenly prodigies. 10. And Jethro said, Blessed. Hence it appears that although the worship of God was then everywhere profaned by strange additions, yet Jethro was not so devoted to superstition as not to acknowledge and honor the true God. Nevertheless, the comparison which he subjoins, that Jehovah is greater than all gods, implies that he was not pure and free from all error. For although the prophets often so speak, it is with a different import. For sometimes God is exalted above the angels, that his sole eminence may appear, every heavenly dignity being reduced to its due order. Sometimes, too, he is improperly called greater, not as if the false gods had any rank, but that the greatness which is falsely and foolishly attributed to them in the world may be brought to naught. But Jethro here imagines, in accordance with the common notion, that a multitude of inferior gods are in subordination to the Most High. Thus, where the pure truth of God does not shine, religion is never uncorrupt and clear, but always has some dregs mixed with it. At the same time, Jethro seems to have made some advance, for in affirming that he now knows the power of God, he implies that he was more rightly informed than before, unless perhaps it might be preferred to understand this of the experimental knowledge, which confirms even believers, so that they more willingly submit themselves to God whom they already knew before. Meanwhile, there is no doubt that by the name of Jehovah he designates the God of Israel, for, although they boasted everywhere that they worship the eternal God, yet by asserting the true deity of the one God, he puts all others beneath him. At any rate, he confesses that, by the history of their deliverance, he was assured of the immense power of God, who had manifested himself in Israel so as to despise, in comparison with him, whatever gods were honored elsewhere in the world. The latter clause 197,197 SM has rendered this clause in re qua insolenter egerunt. Contra illos, they drowned. Thus, Matthew 7:2. The exposition which some give seems too limited, viz., that the Egyptians who had drowned the infants in the river were themselves drowned in the Red Sea. I prefer then to extend it to every instance of punishment which they received. 12. And Jethro. Although I do not think that Jethro had previously sacrificed to idols yet, because he worshipped an unknown God, with but a confused and clouded faith, it appears that this was his first sincere and legitimate sacrifice, since the God of Israel had been more clearly known to him. We may gather from hence that it was duly offered, because Moses and Aaron and the elders openly professed themselves his companions, and partook with him, for it is not merely said that they came to eat bread with him, but before God, which expression describes a sacred and solemn feast, a part and adjunct of the offering and divine worship. But they never would have willingly polluted themselves with the defilements of the Gentiles for the sake of gratifying an unholy man. It follows then that this was a token of his piety, since they did not hesitate to become partakers with him. We ought, indeed, to have God before our eyes, as often as we partake of his bounty. But we shall hereafter see that this expression is peculiarly applied to sacrifices, wherein the faithful put themselves in the presence of God. Yet, do I not admit that Jethro slew the victims in right of the priesthood which he exercised in the land of Midian? But because there was more liberty, as will be explained in its place, before the law was prescribed by God, it is my decided opinion that by the word bread, the manna is incontestably meant. SM has rendered this clause in requa insolenter, egerunt contra illos, perierunt, and in his note he says, hoc est, remensis est illis ea mensura qua ipsi mensi fuerunt Israelitis. They drowned the little ones of Israel in the water, and they also perished in the waters. Thus Abraham Sepharadi expounds this passage, ali sic exponant, propteria quod superbi egerunt contra eos, voluit quoque Deus se magnificum ostendere contra Egyptios. W. (13) And it came to pass, a memorable circumstance, and one well worth knowing, is here introduced. In that form of government over which God presided, and which he honored with extraordinary manifestations of his glory, there was something deserving of reprehension, which Jethro corrected, and, again, Moses himself, the mighty prophet, and with whom alone God was thus familiar, was deservedly reproved for inconsiderately wearing away both himself and the people by excessive labor. It was a proof of his illustrious virtue and mental heroism to undergo so many troubles, to endure so much fatigue, and not to be subdued by weariness from daily exposing himself to new toils. It betrayed also a magnanimity never sufficiently to be praised, that he should occupy himself gratuitously for this perverse and wicked people, and never desist from his purpose, although he experienced an unworthy return for his kind efforts. For we have seen him to have been often assailed by reproaches and contumelies, and assaulted by chidings and threats, so that it is more than marvelous that his patience, so constantly abused, was not altogether worn out. In this, assuredly, many virtues will be discovered worthy of the highest praise. Yet Jethro in these very praises finds occasion of fault, whence we are warned that in all the most excellent acts of men, some defect is ever lurking, and that scarcely any exists so perfect in every respect as to be free from any stain. Let all those, then, who are called on to be rulers of mankind know that however diligently they may exercise their office, something still may be wanting, if the best plan that they adopt be brought to examination. Therefore let all, whether kings or magistrates or pastors of the church, know that whilst they strain every nerve to fulfill their duties, something will always remain which may admit of correction and improvement. Here, too, it is worthwhile to remark that no single mortal can be sufficient to do everything, however many and various may be the endowments wherein he excels. For who shall equal Moses, whom we have still seen to be unequal to the burden, when he undertook the whole care of governing the people? Let then God's servants learn to measure carefully their powers, lest they should wear out, by ambitiously embracing too many occupations. For this propensity to engage in too many things, piomicron lambdopsilon per halafagam, mamuomicron sigmonueta, is a very common malady, and numbers are so carried away by it as not to be easily restrained. In order, therefore, that every one should confine himself within his own bounds, let us learn that in the human race God has so arranged our condition that individuals are only endued with a certain measure of gifts, on which the distribution of offices depends. For as one ray of the sun does not illuminate the world, but all combine their operations as it were in one, so God, that he may retain men by a sacred and indissoluble bond in mutual society and goodwill, unites one to another by variously dispensing his gifts, and not raising up any out of measure by his entire perfection. Therefore Augustine 190 videndum adium. Ne forte abi voluerit Deus abi alienigena ad moneri moisen, ubi et ipsum possit par superbia, etc. Augustine, Quaest, in X, vol. 3 pt. 1 p. 442. A truly says that God humbled his servant by this act, just as Paul reports, that buffetings were inflicted on him by the messenger of Satan, lest the grandeur of his revelations should exalt him too highly. 2 Corinthians 12:7-15. And Moses said unto his father-in-law, Moses replies ingenuously, as if on a very praiseworthy matter, like one unconscious of any fault, for he declared himself to be the minister of God, and the organ of his spirit, nor indeed could his faithfulness and integrity be called in question. He only erred in overwhelming himself with too much labor, and not considering himself privately, nor all the rest publicly. Yet a useful lesson may be gathered from his words. He says that disputants come to inquire of God, and that he makes them to know the statutes of God and his laws. Hence it follows that this is the object of political government, that God's tribunal should be erected on earth, wherein he may exercise the judge's office, to the end the judges and magistrates should not arrogate to themselves a power uncontrolled by any laws, nor allow themselves to decide anything arbitrarily or wantonly, nor, in a word, assume to themselves what belongs to God. Then, and then only, will magistrates acquit themselves properly, when they remember that they are the representatives vicarios of God. An obligation is here also imposed upon all private individuals, that they should not rashly appeal to the authority or assistance of judges, but should approach them with pure hearts, as if inquiring of God. For whosoever desires anything else except to learn from the mouth of the magistrate what is right and just, boldly and sacrilegiously violates the place which is dedicated to God. 17. And Moses' father-in-law said, he does not absolutely condemn the whole system which Moses had before adopted, after the manner of morose or froward or ambitious men who, by carping at some trifle, obscure the noble deeds of others, but by seeking only to correct a part of it, he detracts not from the just praise of Moses, and leaves the power which God had conferred upon him untouched.
13.
Herein his moderation is worth observing, for he does not abuse this pretext of a particular error, so as to upset the due order of things, but only advises Moses how he may usefully execute the office which God had conferred upon him. 19. I will give thee counsel. Jethro dares indeed to promise success, if Moses will obey his counsel, yet does he not proudly boast that this will be the fruit of his own prudence, but ascribes it to God's blessing and grace, if he prospers even when nothing is established but on the best system. For this is the import of the expression, that a counsel occurs to him, which if Moses follows, God shall bless him. Nor yet does he reprove Moses, as if God had not been thus far with his pious zeal and industry, but rather hints that God is the author of this counsel, which he will follow up with his grace. In sum, he does not state it to be his object to diminish in the smallest degree the grace which Moses had already experienced, but to point out a plan, of which God will, by its result, show his approbation. Then follows the other point to which I have alluded, viz., that he does not rob Moses of his authority so as to overturn his call from God, but rather by exhorting him to proceed, desires that what God has once ordained should be firm and inviolable. It is well also for us diligently to consider that counsel be taken according to circumstances and expediency, so that there be no departure from the ordinance of God, because it is sinful to entertain the question whether we should obey God or not. Accursed, then, are the deliberations wherein it is proposed to alter anything in God's word, or to withdraw ourselves from the bounds of our calling. We have said that the burden whereby Moses was weighed down was not of God's imposing, but only had he been set over the people as their leader, as far as his ability permitted. Jethro leaves this unaffected, and thus confirms by subscribing, as it were, to the decree of heaven. Because he was chosen to be as an interpreter, and God familiarly admitted him as the mediator between him and his people, Jethro enjoins him to continue in the discharge of these duties. But because the possession of the supreme government did not interfere with the duty of a prophet, he desired also the greater matters to be referred to him. For I so interpret the expressions, that Moses was to be to God-ward, for the delivery of the rule of piety, and for the performance of the prophetical office, whilst the weightier causes were to be referred by the rulers to him, that every one might have justice done him. 21. Moreover, thou shalt 199,199, thou shalt choose. Lat. Provide out of all the people, literally so. Thou shalt provide, meaning, thou shalt choose out and take the most worthy, so that such an office be not entrusted rashly to any one that offers. But this was most reasonable, among a free people, that the judges should not be chosen for their wealth or rank, but for their superiority in virtue. Yet, although it be right that regard should be chiefly had to virtue, so that if any one of the lower orders be found more suitable than others, he should be preferred to the noble or the rich, still should anyone choose to lay this down as a perpetual and necessary rule, he will be justly accounted contentious. Jethro enumerates 4 qualifications which must be principally regarded in the appointment of judges, viz., ability in business, the fear of God, integrity, and the contempt of riches, not to exclude others whereof, as we shall soon see, mention is made in the first chapter of Deuteronomy, but to signify that all are not qualified, nay, that extraordinary virtues are required, which by synecdoche he embraces in these 4. The words which we translate brave men, 200,200 Anshai Hill, men of might. It is SM who thinks the words to mean strong and hardy men, capable of bearing fatigue. Alpha iota delta halfus, delta psilon alpha tau omicronis, LXX. W. Viros fortes are in the Hebrew men of bravery, viros fortitudinis, by which title some think that strong and laborious men are described. But in my opinion, Moses rather designates strenuous and courageous persons, whom he opposes not only to the inactive, but to the timid and cowardly also. But because vigor of mind as well as of body is but frail without the fear of God, he adds piety in the second place, in that they should exercise their office as having an account to render to God. Truth is opposed not only to deception and gross falsehoods, but to popularity hunting, flattering promises, and other crooked arts, which tend to corrupt justice. Lastly, hatred of covetousness is demanded, because nothing is more antagonistic to justice than eagerness for gain, and since snares are so constantly set for judges by the offers of pecuniary advantage, they would not be duly fortified against this mode of corruption, unless they earnestly detested avarice. 23. If thou shalt do this thing, what immediately follows, and God command thee so, may be taken in connection with the beginning of the verse, as if, in self-correction, Jethro made the limitation, that he did not wish his counsel to be obeyed unless God should approve of it. Others extend it more widely, that if Moses followed God's commands in all things, this moderation of his duties would be useful. However you take it, Jethro declares that he would have nothing conceded to him, which should derogate from God's supreme authority, but that there was nothing to prevent Moses from following, as he had done, God as his leader, and still adopting the proposed plan. Yet he signifies that this was to be but temporary, when he adds that the people should go in peace or prosperously into the land of Canaan. Jethro, then, had no wish to establish a law for posterity, but points out a remedy for present inconveniences and a provisional arrangement. There is an 1201. There is an obscurity here in the Latin, which I have not been able to remove. The words are atque ut vulgo loquitur modum permissionis ostendit. The common language to which C alludes may probably be that of the ancient grammarians. The FR's parmeniere de provision, commandit, until the people should obtain a peaceful resting place. 24. So Moses hearkened. Here is a remarkable instance of modesty, that Moses is not indisposed to submit himself to the counsel of his father-in-law. For although Jethro was his superior in age and in degree of affinity, in other respects he was far inferior to him. This yielding then of Moses to his authority lays down a rule for all the greatest and most excellent doctors, that they should not refuse to receive the admonitions of those whom they admit to teach rightly, although they are not of such high dignity. For Cyprian 202,202 et ideo, vir sanctus Cyprianus. Ip. 7:412. Ad Pompium. Non solum doctus. Sed idiom docibilis. Quod in laude episcopal.
Grace and peace. Scripture is the word of the living God. Thanks be to God.